Good morning. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. I'm Councillor John Ward and will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table, we have planners Andrew Parnell, Helen Beaumont, Helen Mellors, my Deputy Councillor Karen Vincent and Officer Dawn Matthews. We'll now have the fire safety notice read out, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the fire alarm sounds, we do need to evacuate the building. There are 2 fire exits from this room. One is through the double doors where you came in, and the other door is to the right of the stage, which leads to an external fire escape. Please note, in the event of a fire, you should not use the lift. And in the event of an evacuation, we meet to the left of the driveway at the main entrance of Thorpe Lodge. Thank you.
Thank you. The meeting is being live streamed. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record the meeting, will you please identify yourselves now? Please can you all ensure your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent. Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone whilst the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks at various times throughout the meeting. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. The time allowed is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, with a maximum of 15 minutes per category. Only people who have been registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something the speaker has said, and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is Parish Town Council first, followed by objectors, and finally supporters, e.g. the applicant agent. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes for each speaker. This will be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said, and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents, photos, etc. at this meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting? No? Thank you. Right, item 1 on the agenda, declarations of interest, and I will declare declaration for all councillors for item 2, as the applicant is Lana Hempsel, who is known to all of us. Are there any other declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. Apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Hempsel and Councillor Riley, and Councillor Holland is substituting for Councillor Riley.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Yes.
I just want to declare that Mr. Brown is a member of the Broadland Parish Council and I'm District Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Right, that takes us on to the minutes of the meeting held, the last meeting held on the 21st of December 2022. Are there any comments on the accuracy of those minutes, please? Are you happy? Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Are there any matters arising from those minutes, please? No, thank you. Right, well, that leads us on to the first application, which is 2021-22070 North Land at Buxton Road, Horsted. And hand you over to Officer Andrew for this one, please. Is
No,
Helen,
Fred got me to do-
Helen's doing this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Oh, I think further away. Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, so this is an application for a site just south of Buxton Road, just before you come into Horsted. So just having a quick look at the plan, the site is here. We've got one dwelling here, and then there's further dwellings along here, and that's kind of where the settlement limit comes forward. So we'll just go on to the next slide, which shows the settlement limits for Horston. Obviously, you'll be aware that Coltishall is very close by as well. So the site itself is here, so it's outside the settlement limit. There's a small gap in between, and then you've got the main settlement there. Okay. Okay, so just looking at this kind of aerial photo image to kind of give you a bit of a flavour of the area, you've got the more built-up area here of Horsted that has more of a kind of an urban feel, and then obviously as you come in on the B1354, then you have got a much more rural feel. So this is currently an agricultural field. The site is in here. It's also worth noting just on here that we've got the 2J's campsite on the other side of the road. So just going down to the kind of layout plans, I don't know whether you can, because the hatching is quite light on this, but just for the wider context, the application is for an outline application for 2 dwellings, also includes a footpath link as well. What's worth noting on this drawing is that it's also proposed some off-site woodland planting, additional planting along here, which you can see on this plan here at the bottom. Okay. Now, if we just go into this plan, which just shows things a little bit clearer of what's happening on the actual site. So, as I said, it's an outline application, all matters reserved except for access. So it's proposed to have 2 detached dwellings here. It's proposed to remove the hedge line along here to create the new access and visibility display and replant behind. So that hedge would be removed, and then there would be an adoptable footpath along that part of the road frontage, which then joins up with the other footpaths into Horsted and Coltishall. Then beyond where the 2 dwellings would be, it's then proposed to have a footpath behind that existing hedge, which would, and then we've then got, it's now proposed to have some additional planting to the south of that footpath, so hedging either side of that footpath. You'll note from the agenda that that additional extension to the red line there and that additional hedge planting is still out to consultation until Friday. So the recommendation is subject to no significant issues being raised by that. So just in terms of our kind of starting point with this, obviously we go back to the main consideration, which is the development plan. The key policy in terms of that is GC2, which basically restricts development unless it's allowed by Pacific policy and there's no adverse impacts. So that is a policy stance. Obviously, we are in the nutrient catchment here. So in terms of the 5-year supply, which we've obviously said we acknowledge that we can't demonstrate, we don't need to engage paragraph 11 and then tilted balance. and that significant demonstrable harm test, because there is an unresolved impact on those protected sites. So we're not engaging that policy. I think the next kind of thing, so, in general terms, it is contrary to that GC2 policy, but we will look at the benefits and harms of the scheme. I think one of the key things is the character and appearance of the area. We'll just go down to my next photo, because I think that kind of demonstrates it. Here you see you've got an existing hedge that's looking away from Horsted. This is looking towards Horsted as you come in. As you can kind of see from that photograph, the approach to Horsted has a very kind of sort of rural, verdant character. There is very much a very soft transition from the countryside into that built-up area, and that's very key. There'll obviously be, at this part, that hedge planting will be removed, the hedge removed there, and then additional hedging planted further back, but obviously you will see those dwellings. Now, I think what's really key with this this site is actually we've had several applications in the past for dwellings on it, including a relatively recent appeal in 2016, which was dismissed on landscape grounds at the time when we couldn't demonstrate a 5-year land supply. So the inspector had engaged that sort of lesser test. And I think what I will do now is just take the opportunity to actually quote what the inspector felt in part of his appeal decision, because it is very important in terms of this this application. And he said, in my view, this would amount to would not amount to infilling, and instead would create a ribbon of frontage development along the south side of Buxton Road, and thus a narrow linear extension of the settlement into the countryside. The proposed development would therefore restrict views over the open countryside to the south. Moreover, through the inevitable bulk of the development in a place of an open field. The proposed development would erode the soft transition from the countryside to the main built-up part of the village. So that's directly what the inspector said. It was for 5 rather than 2 dwellings, but I think that harm still exists, because we would be eroding that character as we come into the village. Obviously, additional planting is proposed, which we saw in the previous screen further to the south. There would obviously be biodiversity benefits in terms of that. But in terms of that landscape harm that we've identified here of coming into the village, actually, that doesn't really address that or mitigate that. So we do consider actually that is contrary to EN V2, and that appeal decision is a significant material consideration. Just in terms of the connectivity of the site, obviously having an adopted footpath, it's there in perpetuity. That could be secured in front of the existing or the proposed dwelling, sorry. So we have got good connectivity into the main village and the services. So we're not saying the dwellings in themselves are in an unsustainable location from that point of view. In terms of the footpath that we've got, which is behind the hedge, which would then connect the site to the dwelling of White Horse Farm, I think it's called. And then you've obviously got the campsite, which is people would still have to cross the road to get to the campsite. That would obviously improve the connectivity of the campsite to the site. Highways have said and have been quite clear they won't adopt a path which is behind a hedge. So we've taken further legal advice. We'd have to look at trying to secure that through a Section 106 agreement. That doesn't have quite the same security as having an adopted path. There is more risk of it potentially being lost in the future. So we wouldn't give that quite so much weight as an adopted footpath. The other alternative is potentially dedicating the path as a public right of way, but that would have to be with the agreement of the public right of way teams, and that hasn't been explored with them at all. So we can't give any weight to that possibility, really. In terms of other issues, there's no highway objection. They would be looking to move the 30 mile an hour limit to the further out to the edge of those where the dwellings would be. There's obviously some gain, biodiversity net gain in terms of the off-site planting. Again, that would have to be secured by a legal agreement because it isn't really that well associated with how dwellings. We're quite happy that there wouldn't be any, or we could achieve dwellings on there without a neighbour impact. Obviously, the key considerations are, again, the impact on those protected sites. Firstly, in terms of nutrients, we don't have a solution for that. So that obviously forms part of that reason for refusal. Obviously, and the other thing is the recreational impact in terms of GIRAMs. The applicant has indicated that they're happy to sign a unilateral on that, but we don't have a fully signed unilateral at this stage. The other thing is probably just to mention, obviously these dwellings could potentially meet the criteria for self-build dwellings, but actually in terms of the overall things, then it's probably got limited benefit because we are providing more than adequate self-build dwellings through existing planning permission. So that's not necessarily an overriding benefit. So I've just flicked through these photographs, I think, before we conclude. So again, here's the existing hedge, which is going to be removed. That's the hedge behind the footpath. We're looking towards Horsted and that rural approach. This is a little bit further back behind the dwelling. Again, you can see it does still have that very much rural approach. This is where the footpath, existing field access, where the footpath would come out. This is as you come straight into Horsted, where the 30 mile an hour limit is at the moment. You can see the existing footpath behind there. That's looking out of Horsted. Again, you can see that hedge and that very rural impact character. This is just looking at the south from within the site. So you've got the tree, that woodland tree belt, which is being proposed, would be at the bottom there. So you can see, obviously, the biodiversity benefits, but not necessarily the impact wouldn't mitigate the impact of the development as such. So yeah, there's another one. So then we're back to that again. So I think just in terms of drawing things to a conclusion, I think obviously it is contrary to the development plan and GC2. We do have a relatively recent appeal decision when we didn't have a 5-year land supply on this site, which shows that landscape harm. That is a significant material consideration in terms of this application. So it would encroach into the countryside and erode that rural approach. There is obviously the harm on the protected sites from the recreation and the nutrients as well. And we, consider that those don't are not at all outweighed by the benefits of, say, 2 self-build dwellings when we're already providing those. The footpath in the overall is not considered an overriding in terms of those connectivity and potential economic benefits would be relatively minor. So we don't see that there's any material considerations from departing from the development plan, and therefore we would recommend refusal. Obviously, it is authorised refusal subject to no issues occurring from the consultation, which expires on Friday.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for the officer, please? Yes, Councillor Holland.
You're saying, just so I'm clear, you're talking about when you're talking about biodiversity gain by the tree planting, did you say that doesn't compensate for the biodiversity loss of actually building the properties?
No, there would, if you count there would be an overall gain, because obviously you are losing the hedge. At the moment, it's a sort of an arable field in itself. So the biodiversity on the site itself is really gained from the hedgerows. So obviously, if you do additional planting down here off site, then you would end up with an overall biodiversity net gain.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. The fact that one of the reasons on the report for refusal is nutrient neutrality, we have no option but to go along with that at the moment, do we?
At the moment, we can't make a lawful decision to approve because there is no mitigation on the nutrients neutrality. That's correct. That doesn't mean to say there won't be in the future.
So why has it come to committee then?
It's come to committee because of the local member call-in.
Applications can be approved subject
So it
to.
couldn't have been delayed then until we've sorted out nutrient neutrality?
It could have been. In some cases, we have authorised to approve subject to that being resolved. But obviously, the applicant was keen to have a decision on the principle of the development. And for the reasons outlined in the report and outlined by Helen, we do feel that the previous appeal and significant harm to the landscape has not been addressed outside the development limit. We are looking to have planned growth as per our development limits. So we feel that hasn't been addressed. But also an additional reason for refusal would be we haven't got a satisfactory mitigation on nutrients neutrality.
I've got Councillor Adams and Councillor Leggett.
I think, Chairman, my question is that the planning inspector did say, did he not, that even if we didn't have a 5-year land supply, this would not affect his decision at all, because in his view, that the harm done would outweigh any benefits, regardless of a 5-year land supply. I don't know whether we have or haven't got a 5-year land supply at the moment, but nonetheless, even if we haven't, the planning inspector made it clear that that was not part of his consideration. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So at that time, they assumed obviously doing that tilted balance, in my opinion, on that scheme. So that's correct. I think it's fair to say there is an additional material consideration, which is the provision of the footpath, which wasn't there previously. But in our opinion, that doesn't override that harm of actually being outside the development limit and the harm to the rural landscape area, which, as outlined in the appendix in the appeal, was very strong. And we don't feel that has been addressed, and we haven't got the evidence to show. And it's important that members would also have the evidence to show that actually that has been addressed. In our opinion, that has not been.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Fisher raised a point that I need just clarification on. Am I correct in understanding that this application could still be approved subject to getting the nitrate?
If members were minded to feel that the proposal outside the development limits and the harms had been addressed, as outlined by the appeal statement, in our view it hasn't, then you could authorise subject to that mitigation being addressed. But obviously you would have to have the evidence to say how that's been addressed and why it's acceptable contrary to policy. But yes, technically you could do that, but we're not in a position to lawfully be able to issue an approval without that mitigation being resolved.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Vincent and then Councillor Karimi.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a specific question, if I may, about highways access to the field behind. I noted in the report that highways raised a concern about that, and I don't know if you could clarify, please.
Okay, you can actually see on this plan, they are proposing to have the field access go between the two dwellings. I think what highways have said, and which we could condition, is that any gate to that field would have to be set back significantly, so that a tractor and trailer could then pull off the road and undo the gate. So that could be addressed by a potentially by a condition.
Just clarify. If I can just clarify, so if that wasn't set back, that tractor trailer would be blocking the drive entrances to those properties if it pulled in.
Yes, I think in terms of the design, the highway officer has said that it's probably not the best of approaches, because obviously if you do have tractors and trailers, if it's not set back, then you've then got the access to those dwellings blocked.
Councillor Karimi?
Thank you, Chair. You quote the inspector's report, but this covers 5 dwellings, and a lot of it, the quotes in here say it's a significant bulk of development, and an inevitable bulk of development would erode the soft transition to the countryside. We're not talking about 5 houses here. We're talking about 2 houses here, I think that's sort of.
I think that harm, just going back to the photographs, you've obviously got that soft transition at the moment. Whether you've got 2 dwellings there or whether you've got 5, there is still harm in terms of that coming into that settlement.
But there's 2 houses. You've got houses either side of that plot. You've got the White Horse Farm one side and the other building the other side. So 2 houses going in will be not as bad as the bulk of 5 houses being in there. And also, when do we ever reconsider the settlement areas of these places? Because they seem to come up a lot with small properties like this, or 1 or 2 buildings. But when we have big developments going along, we're not considering settlement areas then.
Shall I answer that? As part of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, there was an opportunity to look at settlement boundaries, but there hasn't been any proposed changes for Horsted. So it is as per the existing settlement boundary.
Okay. Any other councillors have questions for the officer? No. Then we'll go to public speaking then. And I'll ask Mr. Campbell-Jones to come forward, please. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, sir, and when you're ready, you will have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Horsted Standing Hall Parish Council. Horsted Standing Hall Parish Council discussed this planning application in December 2021 and again in November 22. Whilst it is outside the village envelope, District Council have approved other nearby planning applications, and this application will fit in with the area. The councillors were unanimously in favour of this application. It is noted that the public footpath the applicant has included in the plans will be of a great benefit to the village and will improve pedestrian safety along this stretch of road. The footpath will provide a safe space for anyone walking in the parish. We have some circular walks within the village, and this will help with a vital missing link. It will also make it easier and safer for those wanting to walk to residences further out of the village. The proposed woodland and hedging on the site will be of benefit to the environment, both in terms of water drainage and wildlife, to both this site and those neighbouring it. The parish council are aware that these are self-builds to be built and lived in by local families, and so support the accommodation needs of a local family. The B1354, of which Buxton and Rectory Road in Horsted forms part of, runs from the A140 at Waterloo through Horsted and Colchel to the A1151 in Houghton, and it forms part of Norfolk County Council's highway road hierarchy and is a Category 3A2 main distributor route. The parish council has a SAM2. A SAM2 is a speed awareness monitor manufactured by Wescatec in Durham. And one of the locations it is deployed on is Rectory Road. The average annualized daily traffic, also known as AADT, measured at that location is over 5,000. That's 5,000 vehicles a day. And the 85th percentile speed is in the region of 34 miles an hour, which is high, bearing in mind the monitoring point is over 350 metres from the existing 30 mile an hour speed limit sign on the entrance to the village. The Community Speed Watch, of which I'm the coordinator, holds regular sessions in the village, and the police approved monitoring point is at the same location as where the SAM 2 is deployed. In 2022, we held 15 sessions in the village and 112 speeding offences were recorded. So to reiterate, the moving of the 30-mile-an-hour zone further out of the village will also improve the safety stretch of this road, and the extension of the footway so it ends opposite with the Horsted and Stanley Hall BR3, bridleway number 3, and the access to 2J's campsite will provide pedestrians and walkers with a far safer route into the village centre and the services beyond. The Parish Council continues to support this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions for the speaker, please? I'll just ask one. You mentioned the speed checks on Rectory Road. Where is that then? Because this development's on Buxton Road, isn't it?
This development is on Buxton Road. Buxton Road becomes Rectory Road at the Church of England centre, which is further to the left. Keep moving left.
Yeah.
If you move further east, keep going. There, that's about the spot where Buxton Road becomes Rectory Road.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Any other councillors have questions for the speaker, please? No? Thank you. Thank you, sir. If you'd like to retake your seat at the back. And I'll call Daniel Austin Feynman and Alan Brown, please, to come forward. And if you decide between yourselves who's going to speak first, and you can have 5 minutes each once you start. Thank you.
This wouldn't take more than a minute. I'd just like to introduce myself. I am the human side of this application. The reasons I'm speaking is basically to give you a bit of history about ourselves as a family. We first moved to Horsted 2 weeks before the Great Storm in 1987. My children were brought up in Horsted and over the river in Coltishall. My daughter went on to marry a local lad from Horsted and still happily married, thankfully. Our business moved premises to Norwich Road, Horsted, over 26 years ago. So we've been in the same business for 26 years there. We've been there serving the area with garage services, sales, tow bar fitting. Our main line is to fit tow bars. I've always been passionate about the village, and we purchased the field in 2007. Previous owner used to live on the field in a caravan at the bottom of the field, and his postal address was the house Ivy Cottage, which is adjoining the field. Agriculturally, it's a very poor quality grade 3. It's very stony. You can't put root crops in it or anything like that. It hasn't been cropped in over 25 years. The last crop was cattle feed, maize, and that was probably in about, I don't know, early 80s. And so there's no loss agriculturally wise. By putting trees there, it's going to be a bonus to it. During the COVID lockdowns and the months after, we opened up the land, the whole field, to the village and people in the local area so they could use it as a safe space and really enjoy the field, basically. Yeah. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sir, if you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Daniel Austin Feynman. I'm a planner at Landgrant. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Alan. So I think just to start off, before I turn to points of agreement, I would just like to draw attention to the fact that the application is an outline form. So some of the points made around positioning of hedges or the exact location of the gate could always be changed once a reserve access application comes in. So fundamentally, they're very, very resolvable problems. So but just in terms of the points of agreement before turning to the principle of development, all parties, including the previous field inspector, acknowledge the site is sustainably located. The sole question fundamentally is landscape and whether or not it's the right or the wrong side of a line. And it is worth drawing attention to the fact that the current local plan makes no provision for self-built housing. One of the points actually being addressed by the GLP, which is yet to be adopted. So policy 7.5 is very express in stating that this sort of development, i.e. self-built housing immediately adjacent to settlement boundaries, should be supported. In much the same way that the neighbourhood plan expressly supports this development, local housing for local people, but self-built housing. So again, yes, the current the current development plan is somewhat ambiguous. You can make the case that GC2 does allow for it, where the benefits do outweigh the harms. I will concede on that point, but the point being the local plan position is somewhat ambiguous, and the emerging plan is very clear in its support for it. As we all know, the GNLP has been delayed, and it is paragraph, I think, 48 of the MPPF that says application shouldn't be refused being premature, that being in relation to emerging policy. Consequently, the idea that an emerging policy is supportive of it shouldn't be used against it simply because it is yet to be adopted, particularly when the delay is clearly not the fault of the applicant. So, moving back on to points of agreement, there is no disagreement, there is no ecological harm, there is no disagreement that the highway impact is acceptable, and neighbouring amenity isn't impacted. There are properties all around it and sort of well related to it. So back onto the principle of development. So there are clear public benefits arising from the fact that you have provision of a public footpath, and ultimately no harms arising from it. In terms of the appeal referenced by the officer, it's going on for 7 years ago, so relevance in terms of time period is questionable. The quantum of development is fundamentally different. It's 5 houses versus 2 houses. It's a significant difference in the bulk development there. And the fact that that didn't include the amount of landscape planting that's going on, bearing in mind that his decision turned, as the officer pointed out, on landscape impact. Landscape impact is different when the quantum of development is different, and it's different when there's supplementary planting to help to mitigate that, both sort of immediately adjacent to the site boundary and along the south in the form of 600 square metres of woodland, which is quite significant. Again, as we've heard from the parish council and has been acknowledged by the officer, there are significant public benefits in the form of path. So again, the other sort of appeal reference in the officer's report dated 1989, which gives some indication of the fact that the planning history actually isn't significantly against the applicant's position here. So again, I do think it is worth bearing in mind that the harms previously identified ultimately have been addressed and can be addressed further with additional planting, which is what is presently proposed. The local policy position is changing and will become supportive once the GNLP is adopted. The neighbourhood plan, should it be adopted, which is currently held up by the GNLP, is again expressly supportive. So the policy position is at best ambiguous and I would argue supportive. So to turn then more thoroughly onto the landscape point, it's worth drawing attention to the fact that the landscape officer hasn't objected. So the whole landscape question is contingent on saying the comments made by the appeal inspector previously against a different development carried forward on a scheme that is fundamentally different. And I really do think it is a point that's worth emphasising that there has been no objection from the council's landscape officer. It's simply the opinion of the officer. It's also worth drawing attention to the fact that the landscape character SPD doesn't identify any features within the field as being particularly noticeable. So fundamentally, it's simply the character of a pleasant but ordinary field that is going to be improved. So again, I would question the level of harm being identified, particularly when the quantum of development has fundamentally changed. It's acknowledged that any level of development will change the character of an area. That's inevitable. But the question isn't would there be any harm perceived in any way. It's would potential harm outweigh the potential benefits, and that's the assessment that needs to be carried out. So in terms of securing the benefit proposed, the applicant has been consistent from the outset in saying they are prepared to enter legal agreements, both in terms of the gyro and contributions, in terms of securing the public path, and in terms of securing other offsite benefits. It's ultimately to be agreed, the precise mechanism of doing that.
Yeah, sorry, you've had your 5 minutes.
Apologies.
Thank you very much. Right, Officer Mellors wished to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to make reference to the fact that the agent made reference to the forthcoming local plan policy, and I'll just draw your attention to the appeals in your papers today, where an inspector made reference to that and quite clearly said that attracts limited weight. So there's limited weight that you can give to an emerging policy, but also of more significance is the planning inspector is looking for modifications to that policy. So you can give no weight, in my opinion, very limited weight to any forthcoming policy, which we're not relying on for this permission. So I think it's just really important that we just note that that isn't actually something that you could consider as giving any significant weight. Plus, that forthcoming policy, as worded, does actually require landscape to be considered in any event. But as I said, it's up to debate. The inspectors asked for modifications, so it tracks very limited weight. So I don't want members to think that that can actually be considered, because we've got an appeal that we'll discuss later on the agenda where that reference is made to. And also that appeal does relate to self-builders where limited weight can be given to. So just wanted to make that clear for you.
Do any councillors have questions for these gentlemen, please? Yes, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Has there been any work consideration done regarding the conservation of species and habitat regulations?
Sorry, in what sense, in terms of how to mitigate potential impacts? So we are confident that can be done. We've done some initial modelling in terms of the nutrient neutrality impact. So there's a watercourse running along the bottom of the site, which is around the woodland. It would be possible to enhance that.
And has that been approved by Natural England?
Well, we haven't. So the original agreement with the officer was to effectively resolve the other issues and then resolve nutrient neutrality. So fundamentally, our position has been we're more than happy to provide those details once the rest of the scheme has been agreed. And it's been until we can agree that with the officers that the approach has been put on hold. So our position here today is to ask for a resolution to grant. And once a resolution to grant subject to nutrient neutrality is made, hoping that it is, we would then be more than happy to supply those details.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Beadle.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. All members are aware that every application is judged on its merits, and that one application doesn't necessarily affect another. So, having said that, in my ward, we had an application about 15 years ago where they actually chopped this hedge down to about 2 foot high and then moved it lock, stock and barrel, roots and all, about 6, 10, well, it varied between 10, 15 foot back and just a few feet back. And it is a beautiful hedge now. Has that been considered in this case?
It has been considered. It was one of the initial things that was suggested. So much of the scheme is sort of subject to further reworking. It is an outline permission, so outline application. So it's something we'd be very happy to accept should that be something that officers were minded to condition.
Okay, if I can just ask Mr. Brown a question. We heard earlier that the 2 self-builds were for local people. Do you have specific people in mind for those 2 self-builds?
My son.
Thank you very much.
We're in partnership with the business and we bought the field together. So we've owned it since 2007.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Beadle.
Oh, sorry.
Silence yet again, Chair. Yes, just that has flagged up another point. Why did you actually get the access to the field between these two properties as against at one side, so that the access was part of the rural environment and not within the proposed built environment?
It was actually to accommodate trying to retain as much of the hedge as possible. So some of the concerns expressed have been from the neighbouring property. So the idea was we could effectively move that access away from it, which would create a consistent hedge line. So continuing the existing hedge sort of in the northwest corner of the site and follow that round and connect that up with supplementary planting. So it was actually to accommodate the neighbour.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 questions, if I may. The first one is, what are your plans for the field behind, given that we heard earlier that it's not agricultural, of good agricultural value?
Basically, nothing. It's not been cropped. It is very, very poor quality, and it would be turned to grass. But my vision is, this might sound a bit sad, really, but we've got 3, 4 dogs buried at the bottom of the field, which have come to the end of their lives and they're buried. They're all black dogs. So my vision is that the wood be called Black Dog Wood. This is my view, and there would be the rest of the field would be turned to grass. We have an issue with ragwort at the minute. We spray it every year, but it comes back. So the idea would be to put it down to grass then and leave it as basically a good looking view, especially from the footpath as you walk down, you can see it. Regards to the actual landscaping, the only way you can see the view is if you're on a double-decker bus, and a double-decker bus doesn't go that way. From the hedge, from the road, you can't see it.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. My other question, the applicant, you mentioned, sorry, the agent, you mentioned about the neighbourhood plan. Is there a specific policy? I know you said it hasn't been adopted yet, but could you help me understand the relevance of that to this, please?
Sure. Policy SOC 1, 2 and 3 are all very expressly supportive of both housing for local people and for self-built housing. So between all three of them, they are expressed on self-build, local housing, and that includes housing outside development boundaries. I think SCO 4 as well, actually, from memory. So, yeah.
And how close are you to completing that plan? Because clearly we're not able to put weight on that until it's adopted.
So the plan was put forward in draft form a number of years ago. It's been held up with the rest of the GNLP, basically.
Can I just check if that is correct?
Neighbourhood plans have been adopted outside of the Greater Norwich local plan process, so I don't know, that's not strictly speaking, it would be for that to come forward by the producers of the neighbourhood plan, because obviously we've gone out to referendum on other neighbourhood plans outside of the Greater Norwich local plan, so I don't quite understand that comment, if I'm honest.
As I say, there is a draft form currently in circulation. That's
It's in draft form, but it's not being delayed because of the Greater Norwich local plan. They're two different independent considerations of planning process, so it's not because of the local plan being held up at all.
Do any other councillors have questions for the two speakers, please? No, thank you. If you'd like to resume your seats, please, gentlemen. And if Councillor Copplestone would like to come forward, thank you. And you have 5 minutes once you're ready.
Get the glasses on. Thank you. I've been district councillor for Coltishall Ward for the last 6 years, and I haven't seen any new housing development in the parish of Horsted with Stanning Hall during that time, until the very recent development of the property called Timberley into 4 large executive-style homes with orangeries. And the site is shown on page 9 of your plans, but is only shown as 1 bungalow. So there is actually 4 houses there. They're under construction. They're almost built. But although the application said that community infrastructure levy would be charged on those, to my knowledge, the parish have not received any contributions for this site, although that might be something that has yet to come forward. For those of you who are not familiar with Horsted, the village is separated by road and a footpath over the River Bure from Coltishall to the north. Coltishall is much larger, has a school, a preschool, doctors, 4 pubs, shops, a village hall, church rooms and a football club, and it is a very, and obviously the church, and it's a very active community. In comparison, Horsted is the poorer neighbour, I would say. It has a pub, it has the Tithe Barn, which acts as a community centre, and until very recently, there was a very small shop. The parish council owns Horsted Mill, which is a very popular destination on the river for visitors for walking, wild swimming, canoes, paddleboarding, but the parish really struggles to afford the upkeep of this historic mill. Horsted has 2 very large estates of bungalows, being Glebe Way and Patricia Avenue, which were built in the 1960s, 70s. And there is an old people's home, which has a considerable amount of sheltered accommodation, which is also sort of low-level bungalow-style homes adjacent to the home. The demographic of Horsted is older, with many retired people living in the village. The applicant of this proposed site, Alan Brown, is an integral member of the community in Horsted. He is Vice Chair of the Parish Council, and in all my time as the District Councillor, Alan has served on the Parish Council. And he works tirelessly to raise funds for the upkeep of Horsted Mill. And his business, the Horsted Motor Company, is operated from the Norwich Road. And as he said before, he's been there several years, and I believe the business moved there in the mid-90s. He currently lives outside the parish as there's no suitable accommodation available. I feel we need homes for local people in the village to remain part of the community as the parish struggles to find willing helpers with an older population. So getting volunteers to help in the community and serve on the parish council is quite difficult for this small parish. If Mr. Brown's application is successful, he is offering to plant a significant area of trees to the south of the field and a belt of trees to the western boundary. And as the officer said, this will create a biodiversity net gain. The proposed footpath will improve highway safety and be an easy walking route to local shops and businesses, especially with the addition of the 30-mile-an-hour limit being increased. And although this is a self-build for two self-build dwellings, this is a little bit of infrastructure provision for the parish of Horsted. Opposite the proposed site, a Freedom Camping Enterprise operates from 2J's Farm on the opposite side of the road from the proposed site. And during last summer, we saw high numbers of visitors camping there, often with young families walking along the Buxton Road with pushchairs into the village, which was very concerning because that part of the road is quite busy. The proposed footpath and increased 30-mile-an-hour zone would certainly improve the situation and the safety for this business. My concern for Horsted is without planned housing growth in the GNLP and the absence of small sites coming forward during the next 6 years, places like Horsted will really struggle to retain younger people with a connection to the village. We need small amounts of housing development so our small village communities literally don't just die out. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Officer Mellors would like to say something.
Can I
If
just,
you can just stay there for a moment, please.
there's just one point of clarification. Community infrastructure levy can be exempt for self-build. So many people who get self-build exemptions on community infrastructure levels. So there's no guarantee that there would be still coming from self-build dwellings, unfortunately.
Do any councillors have questions for Councillor Coplestone, please? No? Okay, if you'd like to resume your seat, thank you. And it's over to you, councillors. Yes, Councillor Beadle.
Just a question, Chair. I forgot to mention during any of the presentations, is there a footpath between the site and the main part of the village on the side of the road?
Yeah, you would get that connectivity into the village, yes.
So the existing footpath goes up to the edge of the boundary of this property.
If you can, I should just zoom in. It's a bit difficult to see it. Oh no, it's gone up. So there's the existing foot. Can you just see the existing footpath? And this is the edge of the site here.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit that listening to what the parish council had to say and Mr. Brown and the agent, I think it was very, very clear to me that some very positive thinking and points came over, and you did the Director of Planning, you did query one of the points that the agent made, but apart from that, I mean, I found it difficult to take it all in, but I mean, they seem very positive points. Were there any other points that were made in support of this case, right the way through to Councillor Cobblestone, that you disagree with?
Obviously, we're recommending refusal because we have to start with the development plan, and the development plan puts this application site outside of our development limits. So there isn't a, in a starting point is it's outside our development limits. So unless there's other material considerations to justify it, then we wouldn't be able to support the application. The applicant is correct. The outline previously was for 5. This is for 2. In our opinion, that does not take away the significant and demonstrable harm that was identified in the appeal decision. That bar was really high by the planning inspector at that time, and policies haven't changed since then. The nature of the application has changed, but not, in my opinion, material to outweigh that harm in the landscape where you are developing outside the development limits. So we do have to be very mindful of that. That is a high bar, but notwithstanding that, it is 2 dwellings instead of 5, and there is a material consideration of providing a footpath. But that, that is actually only linking the proposed new dwellings plus another dwelling, I think, further up the road. So it's not actually, and plus, if you cross the road, you can get to the caravan site opposite, but obviously it is a very busy road. The Highway Authority is looking for changing the 30-mile-an-hour limit, but that's because of the proposed development coming forward. So from my point of view, there is a very high bar to address that landscape impact contrary to policy. Plus, obviously we're not in a position to issue a permission without addressing obviously nutrients neutrality. So from my point of view, and you'll see later on in the agenda, there are other appeals that have been dismissed outside of the development limits, each one on its own merits. But I think there is a very strong case to still continue with the refusal on this application.
Councillor Holland, yes.
So it looks to me that as though there's a path that comes to the end of the housing, then there's this field, and then there's another house a bit further along. Is that right? Yes. So effectively, this plot becomes an infill. I'm not quite clear why the development plan is a material consideration, or is it settlement? Am I getting confused between the development plan and the settlement limit, which is possible? But one of the things that was said was that there was nothing in the GNLP to move that settlement limit, and I'm sort of questioning, well, why would you if you hadn't got something coming forward anyway? It just seems to me that if there's another building further along, that actually
and it is a difficult one, and I appreciate the difficult balance that has to be made along those lines. But the development limit is where development should be permitted, because otherwise, if we were allowing development, we'd be allowing development on the opposite side of the road, everywhere outside of the development limits. We haven't got an infill policy at the moment, and the proposed one is subject to modification. So we haven't got that, and it may be changed in the forthcoming local plan. What I think is really important is that when the inspector considered it, and we do have to, that is material for this case, because it's obviously the harms that we need to make sure we address, did not see this as a suitable infill plot in any event because of the harms it created. So I think your starting point is it's outside the development limits. Has it addressed the previous harms identified by the planning inspectorate? In our opinion, it doesn't. And that's the judgment you need to make here. But the starting point is all development should be within our development limits, because otherwise, anywhere adjacent to the development boundary, you could allow development. And our policies don't allow for that at the present.
Yes, Councillor Karimi.
Looking at the development lines, they're very erratic, and there are developments which are considered to be outside, according to this, but they're within Horsford.
Yes,
I see it as an infill site.
Yeah, and to be fair, that was considered previously, but the harms of that in that approach to that pit of Horsford, where it is very open and rural in character, was significant harm. And we have to address that in determining this application, and that's what you need to do. There will be existing dwellings outside of the development limits. They've been there for a number of years. There has to be other material considerations to justify going contrary to your policies. One of those, which we've given limited weight to, is the provision of that footpath. And clearly there are less dwellings proposed within that area, but in our opinion, whether it's 1, 2 or 5, that harm of having that built form there does not address what was identified as significant harm in the landscape character.
I'm very much strong opinion of we should be providing homes for local people here.
And I appreciate that, but also we have to, as a planning committee, look to your development plan and where we are promoting growth in accordance with our policies. So it's really important as the planning committee, you make decisions in line with your policies.
Councillor Fisher.
I think it was also worth noting that that permission will not be personal to Mr. Brown. So there is nothing stopping him selling it to somebody else. So we can't assume that it is going to be the applicant lives in those dwellings because it could be somebody else.
Councillor Fisher, then Councillor Holland.
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, I do find this a fairly balanced consideration, fairly balanced argument. But when you look at the actual outline of the village, you could quite nicely and easily interpret this as infill. And then with the demonstrable material considerations that are being proposed, I think it almost justifies approval. Unfortunately, because of paragraph 3 and the nutrient neutrality issue, we're stuck where, in fact, we can't, or in my opinion, we can't approve anyway. So therefore, I'm afraid I have to support the officer's recommendation for refusal. But that is only on paragraph 3. I really cannot see that we justifiable reasons to refuse this on the other reasons. But I'm happy to move the recommendation based on paragraph 3 and suggest that the applicant forwards another application after nutrient neutrality has actually been sorted out. Thank you.
Can I just say we can, as we have done with other applications, approve subject to nutrient neutrality being sorted out?
Technically you can, yes, Chairman.
I think that by asking the applicant what work they've done, they didn't indicate to me they'd done nothing.
Councillor Holland.
The other gain, of course, was the net biodiversity gain, wasn't there? So there are two. There's the footpath and the net biodiversity. And I've got to say that although I accept that the material considerations are there, it doesn't seem to me that they are. There is a bit of a judgment value on that as to how much weight you give to it, I think, isn't there? And this is a very difficult one, I'd have to say.
Yes, Councillor Adams.
I don't know whether Councillor Fisher actually proposed refusal or not, but if he is proposing refusal, I think we should refuse it, Chairman. I don't think it's a question of whether it's 5 dwellings or 2 dwellings. The question is and in fact whether it's infilling or not infilling. The inspector did say in his report that it doesn't really matter whether it was infilling. He would still have come to the same conclusion. So therefore, if Councillor Fisher is proposing refusal, I'll second it. If he isn't, then I'll propose refusal to get this resolved, Chairman. Right, okay. I will second you then, which is most unusual.
Councillor Karimi.
I was hoping to put a proposal forward that we approve subject to nutrient neutrality being mitigated.
Well, you'll need to vote against the proposal that's been put forward when it comes up then. Right. Yeah, well, it's been proposed by Councillor Fisher. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the screen and I'm trying to work out where the actual line of the settlement boundary is compared to the plan on the with the application, and it looks to me as if Ivy Cottage is outside and Timberley is inside. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Timberley.
That is correct. Ivy Cottage in itself has been specifically excluded, even though it was next to the development boundary. So the development, there is a gap in between the site and the development boundary. So that was purposely excluded, even though it was adjacent to.
And Timberley, is this the property which was described by the local member as being demolished?
Yeah, Timberley was in the development limit.
Okay. I actually drove inadvertently down this road yesterday, and I don't recall seeing the footpath to going past Ivy Cottage, but I may well be wrong.
Okay, can we go to the vote on Councillor Fisher's proposal to refuse, seconded by Councillor Adams? All those in favour of refusal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Chairman.
And those against?
1, 2, 3.
So that is refused, I'm afraid. Okay. Right, we'll take a 5-minute break before we go on to the next one, please. June, please. Applicant 2021-220. No, sorry. Application number 2, 2023-0306. 21 South Walsham Road. Is this Helen again?
Yes,
Yes,
again.
thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this application is at Southview in Acle, just on the South Walsham Road. It's within the development limits. It's the obviously you'll note from the agenda. The reason it's before you today is because it is a member application. So we've got an existing dwelling. There's also a dwelling located here, which has, I think, recently been purchased. So they're both in the same ownership at the moment. They are two separate dwellings. So just here is an aerial view. You can see there's a number of trees, etc., on the site as well. These ones along here are subject to a tree preservation order as well. What is proposed today is an outbuilding to house a gymnasium, which would be incidental to the dwelling house, so it's not a commercial operation. So it's a reasonably large building here. Obviously located, and these are the TPO trees, just to point that out, and other dwellings here. The main house is here. Obviously, again, it's worth noting there's quite a lot of trees in between. So it's quite a large building, 104 square meters. I think it's also possibly worth noting at this point that the only reason this building needs planning permission is the height. It is above the height, but actually they could cover 50% of their garden without requiring planning permission. So it's the height that's actually triggered the need for planning permission in this case. So it's a contemporary design. Obviously, it's located away from the house, but within the garden. We've got no objections to the design. In terms of the amenity, that's considered acceptable. I'll just flick through to the photographs. There's obviously some sections within. This is slightly confusing because they have set it out on site, but they've also set some other bits and pieces out as well. So it's not quite as easy to say. It's just where these white posts are. So it is within this area here. Okay, that's the dwelling next door, which is in the same ownership. So it's here, but they have got some other posts here. So then that's looking towards the south. So it's in this area here that it's proposed, and that's basically we're standing where the building would be. Obviously, there are views towards that property. As I said, it's in the same ownership, and it's not unreasonable to expect that there'd be boundary treatment between the two gardens. It is considered incidental, and we have conditioned it because it's quite a large building, but it is acceptable in design. The recommendation is subject to us agreeing a tree protection plan. The building itself wouldn't affect any of the trees, but obviously during that construction process, we need to make sure that those trees are not damaged. So that we haven't got that information yet. So the recommendation is subject to that information being received. But we'd like to recommend approval for the application.
Thank you. Questions for the officer? Councillor Folger.
You meant.
You're on.
No.
Yeah. You mentioned the tree aspect, but I gather that will be safeguarded. So, as that is a condition, I would like.
Well, we're still on questions at the moment, Councillor. Right, Councillor Karimi.
It's quite a large building. Is it for personal use, or is not a business going to be run from there?
Yeah, no, it is for personal use. Obviously, we note it is quite a large building, but they technically, without planning permission, could cover 50% of their garden, without requiring any planning permission. So that in itself, isn't a reason for refusal. But because it's quite large, we have, and it's suggested as a gym, we have kind of put that condition on to ensure that it's very clear that it's a incidental use and it's not for general use or commercial use.
Yes, Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I see the parish council said that they'd like to see a condition imposed that the building cannot be used for overnight accommodation. Do you feel that such a condition should be added, or do you not see the need for such a condition?
It could potentially be used as annex accommodation, but it couldn't be used as a separate as a separate dwelling without requiring consent. So I think it wouldn't necessarily be reasonable within the curtilage of a dwelling to say that that couldn't be annex accommodation.
Presumably, if it was if you're going to have overnight accommodation in there, it would be subject to nutrient neutrality.
No, because it's a not new planning unit. So anybody who extends their house for bedrooms, we don't ask for nutrient neutrality. Householders aren't included within that. It's just for a new dwelling.
Any further questions for the officer? No?
Recommendation, Chairman.
Go on then.
Just want to check about neighbours. I think you said the bungalow is in the same ownership, so there've been no objections from there. Any other neighbours? Had they raised any comments?
No, we haven't got any consent. Obviously, that one's in the same ownership. We've got these properties below which have got screening for the trees, and then we've got to the south. There is a property further here, but again, we've got good screening, and it's a single story. It's a single story unit, so we'd expect people to have fences, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to have boundary fences to protect any amenity.
And I think it's just worth noting that although it's in the same ownership, the adjacent residential property, we still have to protect the amenities of future occupiers. So actually we are saying, regardless of the ownership of the adjacent properties, those to the west of the boundary and those to the north, as we look at the block plan, we don't feel there is any significant harm. So it's really important, although it might be in the same ownership, it may not be in the future. So you have to protect future amenities, and the proposal is acceptable.
Okay. Any more comments before we go to the vote? Proposed by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Forger for approval. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. And that takes us on to the appeals on page 35 and 36 and 37.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to go through the appeals. I've just lost my list of those, which is a bit worrying. Here they are, because there are some significant ones on your appeals list this time. So the first one identified at Frettenham, that was for a self-built dwelling outside the development limit and was dismissed on lack of connectivity to services and loss of important grassland and habitat. And that's the one where the inspector, the applicant was referring to a future local plan policy and gave limited weight. So that's why I did refer that today, because the applicant in item 1 also referred to that, but there's a clear material, lack of material consideration. Limited weight can be afforded to that policy that could change in the future. The second one was also for a dwelling outside the development limits, dismissed on appeal. Poor access to services and also adverse impact on highway safety as well. And also both hadn't addressed nutrients neutrality. The next one was allowed. So that was an application for a single and 2-story extension. We refused it because we thought there was an unacceptable and overbearing and overshadowing impact on the neighbour. And the inspectorate considered on balance that there wouldn't be significant harmful impact on the adjacent neighbour. So that was obviously a judgment call on that one. And as always, we will take learning from appeal decisions. And the fourth one is an unusual one. It actually comes under the Antisocial Behaviour Act rather than Planning Act, but that was a high hedge appeal where the appeal was dismissed, and the notice does require restricting the height of the boundary hedge on the neighbours, but that is something that is dealt with by my team. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments from anybody on the appeals?
Right to light is slightly different to being overshadowing and overbearing. So we felt it would have an overshadowing and overbearing. The inspector felt because of the design of it, it wouldn't have significant harm to refuse it, because most extensions on a boundary will have some harm. It's whether that's significant. We felt it was. The inspector concluded on balance he felt the proposal was acceptable, but it wasn't relating to right to light. That is a separate consideration. We felt it was overbearing and would result in overshadowing, which is a material consideration.
Okay, nothing else. Thank you. Close the meeting then. Thank you very much.